I'm so glad that you're joining us again today for our Bible story. It has been a great time going through the book of Matthew together, and we have a long ways left to go. We have so much more to learn about who Jesus is, what he had to say, and then what he did while he was here on earth. Today we're going to be almost, I keep saying this, but we are really close to finishing the Sermon on the Mount. We're at the part in Matthew chapter 7 where Jesus is starting to wrap up the message he was giving to the people that were sitting around listening to him. You see, a lot of people had started to follow Jesus and they wanted to know more about his view on God and his view on the kingdom of heaven and what he thought would come from that. Now, of course, he knew because Jesus is God, and he had a lot more information to share with the people in a way that was maybe a little bit different than they were used to hearing. Jesus had spent quite some time going through a lot of different actions and a lot of different things about what a citizen of heaven looks like. If you belong to God, you are a citizen of heaven. And that's what Jesus was talking about. But at the end of his message, he started to say some tricky things, some things that sometimes are a little bit hard to understand. And why would Jesus say that? And does it make sense? And sometimes we get to parts in the Bible that we feel that way, where we read it and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we read it again and we look at all the verses around it and we think about it, we pray about it, and maybe we even ask someone else about what that means. Well, this part of Matthew chapter 7 is kind of like that. Jesus started talking about this idea of people calling out to him one day and saying, "Lord, Lord, I did all these things in your name." And then Jesus would say, "But I never knew you." And so it gets to be a little bit confusing. Why would they do all these things in Jesus' name, but not ever really know Jesus? How does that work? And what does that mean? And how does that all come together? Well, today I want to explain it a little bit like this. There's a difference between knowing and believing. You see, when we know something, it's something that a fact or something that we might know in our heads and something that we might even have memorized. But believing something is when we not only know about it, but we act on it as well, that we believe it and we know that it's true and then we act on it. And so there's kind of this difference between knowing and believing, and Jesus was talking about that. A lot of people can have really good actions that look very similar to the actions that he was talking about in the Sermon on the Mount, being generous, praying and fasting, and doing all these other things. But unless it comes from your heart, it's not the same. I kind of want to explain it one other way, because as I was looking at this story this week, I was thinking about this person in the Bible it was kind of this contrast between two people, and their actions may have looked a little bit the same on the outside, but it mattered every little bit of what was happening on the inside. The Israelite nation was the nation chosen by God. God had said to Abram a long time ago that if he would leave the land where he was living and go to the land that God would show him, that he would give him that land, he would be a great nation, and God would bless the whole world. I think there was 5 different blessings that God said to Abram. And so Abram did leave that land, and through him blessings did come, and it did become a great nation, although it took a whole lot of time, but that's a whole other story. So we're going to focus on the story of when now this family became a nation and they're living in this land that God had promised them. They were looking very different from their neighbors, especially one way. They didn't have a king. Everyone else around them had a king, and they had these people that would help them. They called them judges, and they would help them settle disputes if they had arguments or what to do, or lead them in war, or all these different things. But it wasn't the same thing as having a king. And so the people cried out to God, and they said to the prophet Samuel, they said, "We want a king like the other nations around us." And that broke Samuel's heart, because he knew what was true was that God was their king. But the people wanted a person to be their king. They wanted a man to be their king. And so God said to Samuel, "It's all right, Samuel, if they want a king, let's give them a king." And so God gave Samuel a person that he was supposed to anoint to become the king. And this man, he was very strong, he was very tall, he was he wasn't from a big tribe or anything, but one of the things that was true about him, his name was Saul, is that he was actually really afraid of a lot of things. And sometimes his fear looked very different on the outside. Samuel did anoint him as king, and he did go into battle, and he listened to the Lord, and he did a lot of really good things. God did, after all, appoint him as king. God said, "This is your king." So he was guys for the job. But then as time went on, his fear of what people thought about him, or fear over different things, caused his behavior to be a little bit different. I want to tell you today a story of kind of what happened when he stopped being king, or when God said he's no longer fit to be king. His actions on the outside, if you just look at his actions, they're not necessarily a bad thing, but his heart was not in the right place. One day they were supposed to be going out to battle. And as they were going out to battle, before they would go out to battle, the prophet or the priest would come and they would sacrifice an animal to the Lord as an offering to him and as a communication, understanding that God was going with them. Now, Saul was instructed to wait for Samuel. He was supposed to wait for Samuel to come. But the people around were like, "Saul, we gotta go. Like, this battle is happening and we gotta go." And Saul's pacing and he's wondering when Samuel, he didn't come when he said he was gonna come. And is he really gonna come? And he was really worried about what was gonna happen. And so instead of waiting for Samuel, Saul took an animal himself and sacrificed it to the Lord. Now, that in and of itself, just the action on the outside, I mean, is it bad to sacrifice an animal to the Lord? No. But was Saul supposed to do it? No. And was his reason for doing it right? No. The reason for doing it was fear instead of worship of God, or even being patient and understanding and remembering what was true about God. So when Samuel came and he saw what Saul had done, his heart broke. And it was then that God told Samuel that Saul's family and himself would no longer be king, that there would be someone else, another family would be appointed as a king of Israel. Well, that broke Samuel's heart. And he had been the one to anoint him in the first place. Samuel went away and he was very sad for a while. He didn't know what to do next. He didn't know how to go about what to do and how to look for a new king. God had showed him who the first king was, and I guess that's what would happen with the second king, but he wasn't exactly sure how that would go. Well, after a little while, God told Samuel that it was time to go and find a new king for Israel. He said that he would find this king in the town of Bethlehem. And so off he went to the town of Bethlehem. And when he got there, God had showed him that it was from this family of Jesse's. Now, Jesse had a lot of sons, and so, I mean, that made a lot of sense, right? He was there, and they were going to, anoint the new king from this family. So first of all comes one brother. He comes by, and says Samuel, he looks so tall and strong and like a good warrior, and he's got to be the one. But listen to what God says to Samuel. "Don't judge by his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So after a little while, there's all of the sons had come in front of Samuel, and each one, God had said the same thing. "Nope, not the one. Nope, not the one. Nope, not the one." All the way through them all until it felt like that was the end of the sons. There wasn't really anyone else around. And Samuel says, "Do you have any more sons?" And Jesse says, "Well, yes, there's the youngest one. He's out and he watches the sheep. He's out in the fields and he's watching the sheep." And so Samuel says, "Okay, go get him. We're not going to sit down. We're not going to celebrate. We're not going to have a feast. We're not going to sacrifice to the Lord until your last son comes through. We meet him and we get the message from the Lord." Well, they waited, and someone went and got David, and David came in from watching the sheep. And as soon as Samuel saw him, God said, "He's the one. Anoint him." So David, although he was young, and he didn't look like the warrior and king that the rest of the guys did, or even like Saul did, Samuel believed God, and he took the oil of the Lord and he anointed David's head to be the next king of Israel. David was going to be the next king of Israel, not because of his strength, not because of his looks or how smart he was or experienced he is, but by one factor alone. Do you want to know what that is? David's heart was the heart that picked God's ways. He worshiped God. He didn't just know about God. He believed God and acted like it. I mean, later on, we hear the story of Goliath, right? And the whole nation of Israel, they know it's true about God, that God is on their side, that God will fight for them and fight with them. They know those things, but none of them believed it in that moment. But when David showed up, he showed that not only did he know it, he believed it. He believed that God was with him, and he believed that this was God's army and God's nation. And he took that slingshot, he wound it up, and he knocked Goliath dead. Because he didn't just know what was true about God, he believed it and acted like it. Do you see the difference? There's a difference between knowing what is true about God and believing what is true about God. And there's a lot of people that do things in life knowing things that are true about God, but not necessarily believing them. And so when Jesus is getting to this end of the Sermon on the Mount, he's kind of telling people that, you know what, it's not these actions, it's not giving and being generous, praying and fasting, doing all of those rituals and all of those things. That's not what makes you a citizen of heaven. Those are all show you, like the fruit we talked about last week, those are all fruit of what grows in our heart. But if we don't first believe that to be true, then all they are just good actions with nothing else. So Jesus wanted to make that difference, that it's not just about our actions, it's about what's in our heart that flows out through our actions. And remember, when I talk about heart, I'm not just talking about the muscle that pumps blood through our body. I'm talking about the place where all of our thoughts are, our emotions, our feelings, all of the ideas that we have, all of that kind of stuff. The stuff where we feel things and know things. It's our guts. Sometimes we say, I know it in my gut, or I know that in my heart. It's the place in our body where we say, it gives us a physical place where we say the things that we really believe or that we really know to be true. And so Jesus wants that those things that are true about God, that we believe them in our hearts so that they come out through our actions. We judge people by what we see on the outside. That's why it's not our job to judge people. That's not our job. That's God's job. But what our job is to change our hearts and renew them so that when God looks at us, he sees a heart like David's heart instead of a heart like Saul's. That's all I have for my story right now. We only have a few more on the Sermon on the Mount, and then we'll be starting a whole new thing on miracles that Jesus did while he was on the earth. A really cool series that I'm looking forward to doing with you guys in a couple of weeks. That's all I have for my story right now. I do have an activity for you, an idea, and I'll show you guys in just a second. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye, everyone. All right, I have 2 activities for you today. The first activity is about trying something new. A lot of times we don't try something new because we're worried about it or what we have ideas about it or what we think about it. We judge it based on the outside instead of what maybe it could be on the inside. For example, in the preschool story today, we learned that Truella had never tried broccoli because she had decided that green food might taste like slime. Now, that's kind of a silly thought, but sometimes we don't try new things because of what we're worried about on it being on the outside, but maybe it could be something different on the inside. So your first activity this week is to try something new and think about why you think about it. The second activity that you can do this week is to make a pair of crazy glasses. What do you think of my crazy glasses, everyone? I did some coloring, right? So I just used some markers. I found these out of paper and I colored them and I made them all sparkly. Now you can add glitter or pipe cleaners, or you can make them out of pipe cleaners. You can add pom-poms or whatever you want. And the reason why we're making these crazy glasses, because they're a reminder to us that even though people look at the outside and they see the actions, where does God look? He looks at our heart. And so this is a reminder of where God is looking, and that's what really matters. God is looking at our hearts, and out of our hearts comes our actions. So this week, try something new, and make some crazy glasses. All right? I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you later, everyone. Bye.